Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had some other questions I was going to ask, but based on your testimony, I think we need to kind of back up and set the record straight before I ask you this question. You mentioned that this was pretty much just an issue for Fulton County. I don't know if you watched the proceedings last week and the testimony last week, but several folks testified who were not from Fulton County that there were issues. In addition to, this is now the second time that we've had an election with these machines, including the pilot that happened last year, as well as the primary election, which just occurred. And we're still seeing the same sorts of problems that extend well beyond Fulton County. So I think it's not going to work, and it's not going to be good enough for you to just keep saying it's only Fulton County and not my issue. What specific policies, as a Secretary of State, are you going to put in place, having watched 2 elections now, to make sure that voting works better?
Well, what I did say, quote, one thing is we have seen is the majority of the issues we see were right here in my home county of Fulton, almost 70%. And last I checked, that's not 100%, it's 70%. And for a November plan of action is increased technical support. We have right now about 2,300 precincts. I believe we may have additional precincts this coming fall. And depending on what the number of precincts, but it's to have one tech in every precinct. And so that is really the resources that both our vendor, Dominion, will bring to bear, and also county resources, and leveraging those efforts. Most of the issues that we did face were relatively low level, simple. It just really, a tech could have solved those, and they did. But when they have to drive 10 minutes, 15 minutes, for example, Fulton County is a 70-mile long county, and you have other counties that are 40, 50 miles, also big counties. It can just take a while to get there. So having additional increased technical support right there in the precinct, we think will handle that. Enhanced hands-on training. Obviously with COVID, that was somewhat a difficult issue for the counties to do. It was also difficult if a county wanted additional training for their election official and their number 2 person for us to get out there during that time. But enhanced hands-on training. Also, we do need more polling places. And the reason we do, people need to understand, when Georgia, just like most of America, and I predict by 2024, everyone in America will have a verifiable paper ballot. It'll either be with a hand-marked paper ballot or a ballot marking device, but at the end of the day, that process takes longer than the old DREs that we had because you're now printing out a piece of paper. It just takes longer, and so you don't get the same throughput. So you need larger polling locations or you need more polling locations. So it's really finding that. But then also, another very important thing is that we need to make sure we expand the use of our pre-election day voting options. So that is absentee, but it's also the 15 days plus 1 of the Saturday of early voting. We had great turnout of 326,000, but we had 811,000 people turn up on election day. Usually it's about 50-50. And so it really got out of kilter there. So we need to make sure that we really encourage people to vote on that 3 weeks of early voting we have. We also need additional poll workers because many of the poll workers that stepped out won't be coming back because the average age of poll workers was 72. And so even though if COVID dissipates a little bit, many of those poll workers that have stepped out may not be coming back. And so therefore, I've already reached out to great service organizations, and one great service organization reached out to us, and that really helped us. So I'm going to throw this idea out to you to consider it. I reached out to Rotary. When you think about your leaders in your community, think about great service organizations, and Rotary has solved so many things. I know they don't do politics, but would they consider, as a group of friends within Rotary, of just adopting one precinct in their county, something like that? Also, what about Boy Scouts for their Eagle Scout and that troop adopt one precinct? Think about that. Also, Alpha Kappa Alpha, I believe, reached out to us, and so your sororities and fraternal organizations like that, adopt one precinct. Think about what that will do. But what it really is, it's community-based, poll workers. Because when you hire people for just one day through a labor-ready service, that is more of a job for them. You really need to have people that have a passion for elections like you do, and like I do, like what all of us do, and so many other people have. We understand it's a precious right to be able to vote. And so we really want to have people that are grafted into the community that really see it as a community, a social interaction event. But we do need more poll workers because of that. So that's a 4-point plan. And over the coming months, we'll be fleshing that out and working with the counties and making sure that they have the resources that they need. Thank you for your question.
If I could just have a follow-up question, is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Yes,
And this is it.
there'll be the last question, but
Okay.
please go ahead.
Yeah, what I'm trying to flag for you is there are still several problems that showed up in the piloting of these machines and using this new election system that showed up again in the primary. That have nothing to do with increasing the amount of poll workers. It has nothing to do with community organizations. For example, the issue of not having power cords. That is something that has nothing to do with how many poll workers are hired, how many community organizations you get in place. So I'm asking, through your power, what do you plan to do that the Secretary of State can control to make sure that we don't continue to go through elections without simple things like power cords?
The counties run elections, and there's a checklist that many of those counties have. And not having power cords I would think that'd be at the top of the list that counties would have on their checklist.
Mr. Secretary, we want to be, respectful once again of